Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the System 2 podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with my friend, Brett Donnelly. Brett is an entrepreneur and psychologist. He started and sold a company called Acacia Counseling and Wellness. He is now writing a book. He's an overall great guy. Brett, it's an awesome to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Matei. Good to be here. Excited to chat for a little while.
So, Brett, what's your story?
Gosh, where do I start? Well, I think kind of starting with, kind of some of my upbringing would probably be pretty pertinent to kind of how my journey has gone. Grew up in a small town in Wisconsin and grew up low income, and was always kind of had a pretty big chip on my shoulder wanting to improve my own family's, kind of status and make sure that I can give to my family the certain things that I wasn't able to get as a kid. And so immediately became interested in business and entrepreneurship. Probably also part of the reason is that I'm pretty stubborn and I'm pretty unemployable for people have tried, and it doesn't usually go too well because usually I like to have my own ideas and find my own way. But yeah, I was really interested in entrepreneurship, and I didn't really know where to start because I was a first generation college student and didn't have a whole mentorship and advice into doing that. And so I thought, well, what if I got my psychology degree along the way? And, I kind of felt like at very least I could open a private practice and kind of start there and see where that got me. So I did that, graduated from the University of Wisconsin with my undergrad in psychology, and then I went on to get my doctorate in clinical psychology in Chicago. While I was finishing my internship and my postdoc, I thought of this idea to create a college counseling center, or albeit like an outpatient center for college students at large universities, and kind of open up some clinics there. And so we started that, myself and one other business partner, back in 2014. Grew like crazy, started opening clinics all outside of UC campuses in California, had one in Minnesota, had a telehealth operation of the company, and then sold in 2021. Since then, just been learning a lot about myself, going through a lot of my own kind of personal journey work. After selling a company, there's a lot of kind of interesting things that happen that I can talk more about. But I've been doing that, been writing a book, like you said, and also working on a couple new business ventures that are exciting to me.
Let's go back to your childhood, as I guess a psychologist would.
Yeah.
What you said you grew up low income, and that made you have a chip on your shoulder. Describe your childhood. What was that? What was it like?
Yeah, it was complex, I think that my childhood, I would describe it as moments of a lot of love. I certainly always had a roof over my head and food to eat. And also I think that, there were several moments of betrayal and abuse. And, having witnessed that as a kid, one of the things that stuck out to me was oftentimes when my mom and my stepdad would fight, it would be oftentimes around money or a lack thereof, right? And so I think somewhere in my little kid brain, I just thought, oh, if I don't want to fight with my spouse in the future, if I don't want to have, fights with my family, the goal is to have as much money as I can to prevent that. And so, yeah, there was a lot of, there's a lot of weird stuff around money in my family. A lot of times where I was, like I said, taken from and betrayed. And so it created a big chip on my shoulder.
When you say betrayed, like were you betrayed around money, or what are some of those stories?
Yeah, there was one pretty significant betrayal around money when I was 18, and my parents had taken out some credit cards in my name fraudulently and signed my name and maxed those credit cards all out without me knowing. So I found out about that as I was applying for what I thought was my first credit card when I was like 19. And I pulled my credit report and saw all of these credit cards taken out without my permission or knowledge.
So what would happen? Like what was your reaction to something like that? Did you know who had taken them out? Like, or was it something you had to investigate?
Yeah, no, I mean, I could tell because it was weird so my grandpa had encouraged me to take out my first credit card. He's like, hey, like if you can, keep a small balance and pay it off, it'll help your credit score rise. And then you can go on and buy a house and things like that. And I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. So I remember sitting in my front room and chatting with it about it with my parents, and I just like I could always tell, when you go through enough like weird shit, with your parents, you can kind of tell when something's off. And I don't know, I could sense in their body language some discomfort, and they were kind of discouraging me to do that, and I was like, something's weird. And so I remember seeing, ads on the TV for like, freecreditreport.com or something like that. And so I was like, I'm gonna go up and check this. So I went up to my bedroom, jumped on the computer and checked it. And yeah, sure enough, there were all the credit cards. And I mean, I was pretty, sure who it was. And so obviously I confronted them and I was quite angry, quite angry, and confronted them, and they admitted to it, of course. And yeah, I don't know. I had an option. I was like, I could either, contact the authorities and go that route, but I had a little brother at the time who I really loved and cared about. And I was worried. I was like, well, shit, I don't want him to be like without his father, his mother, or whatever, if they were to, I don't go to jail. I didn't know what would happen to them, to be honest. And so I ended up just telling them that they had to pay off all the credit cards. I think I gave them, I forget if it was 1 or 2 years to pay them all off, which they did. But yeah, it was kind of a brutal situation to face. And that's on top of a lot of other kind of various trauma and, kind of emotional abuse, witnessing physical abuse in my house, and, a whole bunch of other shit that happened when I was a kid that, that wasn't great. But, again, it's complex, right? You have like these moments of like love and closeness, and then these moments of really scary times too. And so it's like, it's really hard to paint a complete picture of that childhood.
Did your mom and stepdad were what kind of jobs they have? What is there anything entrepreneurial about it? What made you go down the entrepreneurial path in your search for more stability?
Yeah, when I was growing up, I mean, so my mom, when I was really young, worked, usually 2 to 3 jobs. She was a waitress, she was a bus driver. She really, I think, busted ass to try to just like make it for her and I. And then, when she met my stepdad, he was an alcoholic when they first met, and then he's been sober for a really long time now. He got sober when I was in like, I don't know, first grade or second grade or something. But he would kind of be in and out of jobs. And so that made things tight. We would get evicted from apartments. My parents also kind of had a spending problem. We grew up in this very wealthy area of Wisconsin called Lake Geneva. It's a huge tourist.
I'm literally going there next week. That's my brothers-in-law live in Chicago, but they have a place out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, okay.
It's all the Chicago money that comes up there, right?
Yeah.
And so it was very hard, I think, for my parents, who were very insecure about the amount of money they had, to see all of this wealth, that was in Lake Geneva. So they were like, I think the money coming in was never necessarily that bad, but they would spend, right? They would buy big TVs, or just they would outspend what they had. And so, yeah, I think that created a lot of instability. Things started to smooth out a little bit more when I was in like middle school and high school. My stepdad actually created his own company. It was a carpet cleaning company, and I worked for him for a little bit. So I guess I kind of saw some, entrepreneurism from him. But I think the main source that was really exciting for me is I joined this organization called DECA. I don't know if you ever had DECA in your high school at all.
I don't think so.
It's like it's an association of marketing students, and it's this role play. You go to competitions and you role play, and they give you a written exam, and then you usually do like 2 role plays. And so I was in the sports and entertainment marketing category. So they would say, "Hey, Brett, you're the owner of a hockey team, and 3 of your players just got busted for doing drugs. How do you like reinstore the faith for families to come back and bring their kids to the hockey game, right?" And so you have to develop a whole kind of like PR plan around it. And it was really fun. It was a great experience for me, and it got me really excited. I also ran my school store in high school, so I had to keep track of inventory. I had to hire other employees, and that was a pretty cool experience too, growing up. But mostly I always just wanted to do things kind of my way. I was always excited about building. I've always been a leader. I was a kid in school that, like, at my apartment complex, I would gather all the other kids around to like go play football or whatever. And I always just like loved working with teams, loved being in that leadership role, and loved solving problems. And so it kind of just feels like it was maybe somewhat of an innate characteristic that I just kept on following.
When you were giving your initial introduction, you mentioned that you had this complex relationship with money, and you had this chip on your shoulder, and you wanted to make money. But you said it was to improve your family status, not your own personal status. Like, just say more about that. Like, was there some element of this where you wanted the rest of your family to be in a better place, and you wanted to use your own resources to help that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think I've really had much in the way of like personal, like there wasn't ever a lot of ego driven, materialistic kind of reasons for wanting to have money. Not to say that doesn't happen sometimes for me, of course. But like, no, the major goal was, again, having growing up and seeing just how much financial pressure was on my family. I just didn't want to put that on my future family. I could see that vision. I always wanted to be a dad. I always wanted to be a husband. Kanye West has this really beautiful line in one of his songs. He says, "Having money isn't everything, not having it is." And I think that line really applied a lot to kind of what I experienced growing up, and just wanting to provide a lot more opportunity and stability. It's funny. I made like two promises to myself when I was a young kid. I was like, I'm going to have a lot of money and I'm not going to get divorced, because my mom and my dad were divorced, and my dad I didn't see for the first handful of years of my childhood. He left and did his own thing, which was hard on me too. But the funny thing is like I end up, I am divorced and I have money, but I've kind of come to realize that that's actually not what it's about. It helps a little bit, but it's not ultimately what was restricting my family. It wasn't the money.
Super interesting. So what have you found that is more important?
Yeah, I think so. I'm a big believer in like self love. And I think that we can only go as far in loving others as we can love ourselves. And, I think my parents had their own, mental health issues, their own struggles with their own self worth and self love. And I think that, the lack of money kind of put fuel on some of that, right? But there's just much deeper issues. I mean, I could tell you some people that I've known throughout my life that have not had a lot of money, but have been so happy, and they've come from such loving families, and so there's something about having a really solid sense of self, really deep self-love, self-confidence, self-trust that I think is way more important than the money. When I sold my company and created generational wealth, it was a fantastic event, and there was this pretty big high that I rode for maybe the first few months of having that sale. But then I started to realize, I was like, shit, like there's still this like hole inside of myself that didn't feel filled. My whole life I was chasing this moment, and then I have it, and it like I knew something was missing. And being a psychologist and I think I'm a pretty self-aware person, I was like, fuck, what is that? Like, why don't I feel. And I think for me, I started to realize that, a lot of my achievement orientation was from my own feelings of not feeling enough, of needing to prove to the external world that I'm worthy of love, that I'm worthy of respect. And so I was like, oof, I got some work to do. And so that prompted a what's been a 3-year journey that I've done a lot of work, and found a lot of kind of interesting things along the way that have little to do with money.
Well, I would put a pin in that. Let's rewind a little bit to get to the story about how you're able to sell this company and generate just like generational wealth that still wasn't enough to fill that void in your soul. So now, okay, so take us back to college. You start you pursuing a degree in psychology, and a doctorate in psychology. What was it that drove you to understand? I mean, it sounds like, yeah, you do a lot of self-reflection. Was that part of the quest to learn psychology, or what? Or was it, did you have a sense you're going to start a company in that area and you wanted to learn more about it?
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, kind of the stars aligning in the right way. When I was 19, I had this experience. It was basically a one night stand with a girl, and I sort of had this belief.
Tell us more.
I had this belief when I was younger. I was like, and I was, I was very in love with my high school sweetheart. And I sort of had this very core belief that like sex is only meant for like when you love someone. And I had smoked some pot and ended up with this girl in my bedroom and didn't really know her at all. And yeah, like had sex for the second time with the second person ever. And I was just really, really scared by it. I felt a lot of shame around it. And then there was actually a little bit of a scare that she was pregnant. And so I was like, oh shit. And so I got therapy for the first time then because I was just like really kind of reeling from that. Which, looking back on it, it's like I wish I could have talked to my younger self and been like, dude, it's all right, man. You're okay. You're okay. But
Must have been a hell of a night.
yeah, yeah, I was very, very, very pretty young woman, but I think I wish I would have had some more boundaries, but I didn't know what boundaries were back then. So yeah, so I ended up going to therapy, and it really helped. And I was like, I just really loved some of the questions that the therapist asked me, and to kind of like continue examining like what's inside of me, like who am I, use and how am I showing up for myself in those ways? How am I not? How am I hiding? Looking at a lot of my shadow sides. And so I don't know, just it became a really strong fascination for me. And I remember going into my Psych 101 course in college, and the class was like, it was the earliest class at the University of Wisconsin. I think it started at like, I want to say 7 a.m. And, when you're like a 18, 19-year-old kid and you have to get up for a 7 a.m.
That's the
class,
middle of the night. Yeah.
dude, yeah, exactly. It's brutal, but like, dude, I went to that class and I sat in the front row and I was just like, whoa, this is super cool. Like getting to understand humans and getting to understand myself. So, I didn't know what the hell I was doing in college. Like I was undeclared and again, first generation college student. But I knew what I loved. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to follow this thing. I love this and I love business. So I ended up taking a bunch of business classes alongside my psych degree. And yeah, I was kind of like, let me find a problem to solve in the field of psychology or mental health. I had worked 1 year between undergraduate and graduate school at a marketing agency, an advertising agency, and I just did not like it. And so then there I was applying for grad school, and I really wanted to solve some problems in that space.
And then you went on to get your PhD. At what point did you start thinking about creating a company around this?
Yeah, well, so I had like sort of played with starting some companies along the way. There was one company in particular that I started in grad school. It was, do you remember the old like Rate My Professor site where you could
Oh
go
yeah.
and see? Yeah. So I had this idea of this site called Rate My Training, and it was an online portal where students could go and see how some of their, like, when you go through a grad program, you have to go through all these like year-long practicum training, and some of them are really brutal and are pretty abusive. It's free labor for a lot of these mental health associations. And so I wanted to go and create some visibility and kind of be able to showcase what places were treating the students well and what places weren't. And my school didn't like it very much. And so they put me in front of their advisory committee and their, what do they call it? It was basically like a committee to decide if I was going to get any punishments. I forget what it was called,
Like a
but
disciplinary committee or
yeah,
something?
like some
Yeah.
sort of disciplinary committee. Exactly. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, and so they didn't like it. They didn't like that I was using the sites, the practicum sites that they were, giving these students. And so I was like, I think I'm going to shut down this company because A, it wasn't making any money anyways, and B, I was like, I think my degree is going to be a little bit more important right now. So I had to cut and run that for that one. But, again, I just kept on looking for problems. And as I went through all my training programs, especially in the college space, I kept on seeing that the, demand for therapy services for college students far exceeded the supply of clinicians at any of the colleges that I worked at, whether it was University of Illinois, Chicago, or UC Santa Barbara, or I worked for another smaller school in Chicago. The demand was just off the charts. And so I thought, dang, this is a great opportunity to continue working with college students, which I love. I love working with young people. And to actually
How did
company
you see the demand was off the charts? Were there
waitlist.
wait lists for people interesting to come see the
Yeah,
therapist?
like either there would be a long wait list, or back then we used to have like these kind of stacks of paper and you'd have to flip through and there'd be all these individual providers in the community and you'd try to see what insurance they accepted and what specialties they had, and then you'd call them and they'd be like, oh, we're full, or oh, we don't accept that insurance. And it was really hard to get those students placed with the appropriate care that they really needed. I mean, college students are desperately in need of help themselves, and there's just not enough places to get it. So that's when I really got the idea of trying to specialize, particularly with college students, using their student mental health insurance coverage to help really create partnerships with the colleges and serve their students.
And so what was that moment when you actually started charging for this? Like, how did you go from seeing this demand to actually turning it into a business?
Yeah, well, I approached my good friend Keith, still one of my best friends to this day, and I was like, "Hey, man, do you want to start a company around this?" And he's older than I am. He just turned 60, and he's ex-military, and we always had this kind of running joke throughout our company that I was go go go, and he was whoa whoa whoa. And so he kind of kept me in check. And when I first wanted to start the company, I kind of wanted to go pretty big. And he's like, let's just see what happens if just the two of us put ourselves out there. And let's see if we can get enough referrals, just the two of us. And so we started in this old church, and they had a pastor that was going on maternity leave. And so she was like, yeah, you can have my office, and I'll only charge you for, revenue that you actually bring in, which is pretty cool, right? So it really was a pretty easy, zero risk situation for us. And so him and I worked out of that office, and I swear within like 2 weeks, our schedules were just completely full, and we had our own wait list of clients that wanted to see him and I. And so
And
then it
how
was
how
like, all
how
right.
did you do marketing at that point? So how did you find these first couple of patients?
It was all through relationships with the university. So, we were postdocs at UCSB, and then we got an office right in Isla Vista, which was the community that's adjacent to UCSB that a lot of the students live in. And so, we were the closest clinicians to campus. We had the specialty in college mental health, and the school knew us and trusted us. And so they were sending us a bunch of referrals. And so then, it just kind of like went on from there. And it was like, all right, now we have a wait list. Now we need to hire the next psychologist. And then she became full. And that first psychologist we hired ended up going all the way up to become our chief operating officer 7 years later.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we ended up just continuing to hire psychologists, then started realizing we needed admin staff. We got a bigger space, a bigger building. Once that started getting full and we were at the brim, we started being like, okay, well, what other schools could need this? And we had really good relationships with a lot of the other campuses. So I think we leveraged those relationships pretty well, and they trusted us, and that they knew that we were good people doing the right thing. We weren't in it for the money as much as we were in for building this really cool organization.
And speaking of the money side of it, how did that work? Was this covered by insurance? Were the universities paying? Were people paying out of pocket? What was the model?
Yeah, dude, it was a tough model. Like, it was an insurance-based model, and anyone who's ever had to work with insurance, whether you're a consumer, right, whether you're getting your own health insurance and you're trying to get them to cover a claim, or when you're a large, mental health network, like we were, it was brutal. I mean, the amount of money we had to spend on like a billing team just to follow up on rejected claims that were not supposed to be rejected. We spent so much money on that. So, your margins are pretty slim. And with insurance groups, like they'll pay you more if you're a larger group, right? And so as we grew, we were able to get better and better rates. About the time of I want to say it was like 2019 or so, some private equity money started funneling into the mental health space, and they saw an opportunity because it was such a fragmented space. So they wanted to really condense and build these large networks. And about that time, we started seeing that some of these larger groups were getting insurance rates that were about 20% higher than ours. And so that really put the chokehold on us because they could afford to pay their clinicians better. They could afford to give them better benefits and so on and so forth. But
Talk to
yeah,
me.
we, for 7 years of having the company, we were barely profitable. And some of that was our own doing because we put a lot of money, way too much money into growth, to the point where it got a little bit too risky. That was mostly my fault.
You're the go, go, go guy.
Yeah.
So okay, say more about the financial side of this. So you guys, it sounds like it's a relatively labor intensive model because you're bringing in clinicians and then you charge by the hour. Like, what's the ballpark pricing there? And then did you guys have to? You obviously needed physical real estates that you were presumably renting.
Yeah.
Yeah, break down for one location. Like, how does that? Where are the revenues? What are the costs? How does that break down?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you're going to put me to the test 'cause it's been, a few years since I've, had the company now. So I don't remember all of the details, but, yeah, we would bill insurance for someone's care. Let's say, we got reimbursed, I don't know, $150 per hour for that. And we're sharing that with the clinicians. Let's say the clinicians get, I don't know, 75, $85 of that 150. And then, yeah, the remainder of that money is going towards rent, utilities, staffing, so on and so forth. And so the margins were quite slim. I think we did a really good job of giving our people the most money we could while still keeping a roof over our heads. And in fact, I think we should have probably built in a little bit more of a profit margin for safety. But yeah, I mean, really, when it came down to it, it was just like, can we hire a good therapist who can allow us to have, maybe 50% gross margins so that, our net margins could be 10% or whatever,
And
which
how many clinicians would you guys have per location?
when we sold, we had around 200 employees total. I don't know how many of those were clinicians. My guess would be, I don't know, 160, 170 clinicians, and maybe another 30 admin staff and C-level executives.
Got it. Okay, interesting.
Bootstrap too.
Okay, why? Say more about that.
Well, first, I don't think I was ever like wise enough, and I don't think I knew the avenue to actually get money and build this thing with some solid capital. Which, looking back on the experience I have now, I think that would have been a fun thing to go do, right? Like I had 100 different campuses, over 100 campuses that I thought we could be successful at. I think I would have, it would have been fun to go out and raise some money and do that. I just didn't know enough. I was pretty green behind the ears and didn't really know how to go about doing that. I mean, it worked out fine for us, but yeah, we bootstrapped the whole thing and just continued using company profits to grow to the next location.
And how many locations did you say you had by the end?
I think we had like 8 total. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you've built this business. It's now 2020, 2021. At what point did you realize you wanted to sell it? How did you know you wanted to go down that path?
Yeah, it was funny. We got reached out by a public company in the mental health space. And they had reached out to us a couple times before, and I was kind of like, I don't think we're interested. And to be honest with you, like we didn't really think that we would be worth very much because we always heard like a multiple of EBITDA. When that's zero, the multiple doesn't seem to make much difference.
Infinite.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But there was one time when they called and they're like, just come get dinner with our CEO. He'll fly out and he wants to take you out to dinner. And so I looked at the CEO and I was like, oh man, this guy's worth like $500 million. I was like, we got to at least sit down. Maybe I can ask him some questions and figure out some cool, learn some cool insights from this guy. And so I was like, yeah, we'll take the dinner. And so I still remember, we're eating our food, and this is, through a lot of conversation before I asked this question, but I was just kind of like, just ballpark, like, how much do you think you might buy us for? And then they said a number, and I almost like choked on my food because I was so shocked by the number that they threw out there. And I was like, how, I mean, I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, how the fuck are we worth that much? I knew that we grew, we were, 3 years running in a row for the Inc. 500 fastest growing companies, in the country. I mean, we were doing some great things. We had some great revenue, but our profitability was so insignificant. So I started like chewing on this more. And I was like, you know what it is? I was like, they have insurance rates that are like 25% better than ours. So the second that they buy us, they go from, maybe 5% profitability to 30% profitability.
That's massive.
Yeah.
How, like, what would they give you, like a revenue multiple? Or the guys, to your point, like it wasn't like an EBITDA multiple?
Yeah, no, they just gave us a revenue multiple. And so then I started thinking, I was like, well, if we're worth this much to them, like, how much are we worth to other people? So I contacted a few investment bankers, and I hated the idea of giving them 3% or whatever to sell my business. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to sell this thing by myself. I don't know if that was a wise idea or not, but the outcome turned out pretty good. The investment bankers kind of gave us a mid-range and a high range. And I just went out and I put together a deck, and I just sold myself I sold the company to as many, private equity groups or strategic buyers that I could. And we ended up getting more than the high amount from the investment bankers.
Wait,
So,
how, like, did you mind sharing some of those multiples? Like, what was that, like, initial revenue multiple versus what the bankers were suggesting to you versus what you got?
oh gosh, I mean, I think like what we ended up getting was probably somewhere around like 3.5 times revenue. Yeah, I want to say right around there. And I think the investment bankers thought we were gonna get about two times revenue. Yeah, so, what I find really interesting about selling my company, and this is, the advice I have for anyone selling their company, is all you need is more than one buyer, right? And then you can create a bidding war. And so that's we had, I think, 7 or 8 offers, that I was just able to keep going to the bottom offer and be like, "Hey, this is the top offer. Can you do it?" And if they could, then they became the next highest, and then we kept going to the bottom up. And once they dropped off, it then became between 2 different buyers. And so we ended up doubling the initial offer that we got at the dinner table that day. We doubled it.
Holy shit.
Yeah,
Wait, so hang on, and you were doing all this without an advisor? Like, you just figured this thing out, and you talked to banks initially, they gave you some ballpark numbers, and you're like, "How hard can this be? I'm gonna try to do this myself." And
totally.
it turns out that you beat their I kinda like that approach. It's like, "This is the range. I wanna try to see if I can beat the range, and if you can't, then, yeah, maybe I can hire them to get me to the top of that range." But if you found that it was creating this bidding war, end up being I love that approach of going back to the thought you said you go to the top 2 people and try to get them to fight for it, but you went to the lowest person and said, "Hey, you guys are really far off. You wanna try again?" And did you
Totally.
find that, like, yeah, the lowest bids end up becoming the top bids in the next round?
Not many of them. No, it really it really went down between 2 big companies that were really the top 2. But yeah, I have to say, it's something that puts a smile on my face. I'm so proud of that part of what I was able to offer to the company, and I feel so grateful that I had a business partner who could run the day-to-day operations while I was out fighting for our sale, right? Because it was a full-time gig. It was a lot of stress. But, I really feel like if people want to do this, I mean, I was so passionate about my business, and I knew that we were doing things the right way. We had nothing to hide. We had a lot of integrity at the company, and I just thought we had a really good thing going. And so I think that came across in my pitches with potential buyers. And instead of having some investment banker, who doesn't have the core knowledge and the core wisdom of the culture of who you are, where you're going, the opportunity, I mean, they can do the best they can, but, like, I don't know, I can't see anyone selling my company better than I can do it.
Yeah. No, it's and so were you say more about your relationship with your business partner. Did you guys know going into it that you were gonna have slightly different roles? Were there periods when you were stepping on each other's toes? Like, how did you end up with such, like, clear divisions of labor? And was there ever any animosity? Be like, "Hey, you're doing this while I'm doing that."
Oh man, it was a beautiful marriage, dude. It was like, what was so special about Keith and I's relationship is we both had, very similar values. We both wanted to do things, the right way, and we weren't willing to, like, cut corners and sacrifice, especially him. I might have been a little bit more of a cut corners kind of guy, but I learned a lot from him. And, I think that, like, when you can find a business partner that shares your values, that you really, really deeply trust, and yet you two have these opposite complementary skill sets. Oh, dude, like, that is like the perfect union right there. And so that was the case with him and I. I don't know if you've ever read any of, like, is it Gina Wickman, does the Traction book. And he talks about this sort of visionary role in this, and the integrator role. And I was always the visionary role. Like, I was out, like, forming relationships, doing sales and marketing, thinking about new business lines, really the kind of the growth guy. And Keith was much more of the integrator, the executor, right? Like, he was like the more traditional CEO, making sure that, yeah, we had enough money in the bank account to try to get all of my ambitions going. But it was just such a great mesh. And as I continue with, a company that I'm interested in starting now, that I've been putting some work into, I keep on looking for that person, because I love working with another teammate versus doing it solo.
What and, you mentioned Keith was significantly older than you, right?
Yeah.
And he was a veteran. I mean, it sounded like you guys had pretty different how did you meet? How did you get connected to someone? Like,
Yeah, so he's 20 years older than I am and internship. So when he finished his military career, he put in his, I forget what you need to do a pension, like 20 years or whatever. He put in his 20 years and then, went on to get his doctorate in psychology. And so we were in the same internship cohort together. And then we stayed on for our postdoc. I just really liked him. He was just a very like level-headed guy, very like sweet, good-hearted, just a guy full of integrity. And I've always been really like kind of attracted towards people who, I guess maybe are more introverted, a little bit more, kind of thoughtful people who ask really good questions. And that was just Keith to a T. And so, yeah, he was kind of like the yin to my yang, kind of like we had this like really great dynamic because I'm more of that extrovert who likes to go out and make the relationships happen. Yeah, it was just beautiful, man, especially the trust factor. Like if you can find someone you trust, whew, that's half the battle right there. And yeah, by the way, there was no like very little arguments along the way. I think we, for the most part, worked through conflicts pretty well. There was never a whole lot of like stepping on each other's toes. I think we did a pretty good job of defining what our roles were and who would do what. And even in the times when we were both co-CEOs, it was like we still found a way to like make decisions together and try to let like the data drive the decision instead of our own personal ego.
and was it just the two of you guys as partners? There were maybe some employees?
Yeah, well, the two of us were the only equity holders. We eventually set up a profit sharing plan with some of our key executives, and so yeah, we had a core team that would meet. We'd have our like level 10 meetings every week and set up our quarterly and annual goals. And so we had a chief marketing operator, we had HR, accounting, operations, billing, and so we would meet with the heads of each of those departments every week and have fun and solve big problems and grow.
So, okay, going back to the sale now, you guys, you're basically bootstrapped. You're the only equity holders. You sell for 3.5 times revenues. That's a lot of money, to your point. And it's even more because you haven't been diluted over the years by your investors. So it really is a lot of money. And then going to people that, like, to your point, like, you didn't come from money. It sounds like Keith's background, having a military career, he probably didn't have a ton of money either. You guys made bank. Then what? So what's that? Yeah, we're like talking about this first couple of months where you guys just sold. Did you have to like stay on to continue working with the acquirer? What was that? What were you guys thinking and feeling at the time?
Yeah, we did. We did stay on. We had an earnout that was in front of us, and so we were working really hard to get that earnout. That was about what 20% of the deal, I guess, was an earnout. So yeah, we were pretty aligned with them to try to get that.
How did that go? Like, did the post merger company, did you end up performing, or is it not as good?
We performed well, but they did not follow their end of the bargain. Yeah, so
No.
we're in litigation with them right now because of that.
Interesting. Hey, how does that feel? Like, going back to even your childhood and like betrayal around money. Like, I don't know, did you expect that to be a thing? Forget about, I guess there's like litigation and that sucks for anybody, but like for you personally, how did that hit?
Yeah, it sucks. I mean, we had a service that was so wanted by so many different places, and I was so excited by our mission, and I was so excited to expand to different markets. And yeah, am I surprised? Not necessarily. I luckily had talked to enough people that have told me that earnouts can go pretty south. I think if I had a company to sell again, I would be unless I had some sort of absolute guarantee and the paperwork was so cut and dry that, that's what we were going to get paid. I think I would just avoid an earnout altogether if I could. But
Well, what are some, yeah, on that point, like, what are some of the things that you suggest for people to look for in an earnout to make it more cut and dry? 'Cause, I mean, it's going to be tied to like the performance. So it seems like it should be cut and dry, but like, what are the
well,
loopholes?
Well, so in our case, there was one set of money that was for performance, and we hit that target and we got paid for that. But a big chunk of that 20%, like 90% of that 20% was based on growth. And so we needed them to ultimately sign off on, growing new clinics. And so that didn't happen. And so, yeah, here we are. Yeah, it doesn't feel great. When I sign a contract, when I shake hands and do a deal, bet your ass I'm gonna fulfill my end of the deal. And, we live in a day and time where that doesn't always happen on the other end, unfortunately. There's a lot of sneaky ways for people to, try to get more for their investors. I mean, I don't know, I can't really speak much to what happened on their end, but I'm just gonna speak in generalities. Probably a good idea since we're currently in litigation anyways, just to speak in generalities. But yeah, I think that there's people out there that are really looking out for one thing and one thing only, and that's to put money back into the hands of the shareholders. And those aren't really the people I'm looking to do business with in the future. But I get it. It's like part of capitalism, and yeah, it sucks, but I'm not surprised by anything anymore in my life.
It is the unfortunate, outcome. And if you have low expectations of people, you'll be unsurprised. I mean, pleasantly surprised once in a while, and
Yeah.
everything else is like,
Yeah.
this thing's expected. Yeah. But yeah, what was that honeymoon period? Like, there was presumably like a period, like you said, a couple of months after you sold, everything's great. You've made all this money. You hadn't been profitable for a while, so presumably you hadn't been living this crazy lifestyle while you're building a company, and all of a sudden you have a lot of cash in that bank. Did that make you
Yeah.
happy?
Yeah. So it's funny. I actually have a screenshot of this of my bank account before and after. My bank account was literally negative, like it was like negative $14. And then, the after was just an outrageous amount. And I
Like
saved
more
that.
zeros than you've seen in a bank account.
Yeah. 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 So, when I throughout the 7 years of having the company, the most I think I ever paid myself was like 80,000. There was a year of paying myself 26,000. There was a year of like, I think 35, a few years in the 40s, maybe a year 60. But yeah, the most I ever made it was 80. I think at that time we were like the 20th highest paid employees at our own company. We weren't drawing profits very often, if at all. So yeah, it was tight. Things were definitely tight. When I sold, it felt pretty great because it was like, it was kind of the last big life goal that I had for myself was to get to this place. And so the initial reaction was a lot of joy and confidence and relief. Yeah.
What did you buy? What were some of the things you splurged on?
A house was what was probably the thing I was most proud of. Growing up when I was younger, my family never owned a home. And so I really wanted to provide a home for my wife and for my daughter. So I was really proud of that. Paid for the whole thing in cash. That was pretty cool. And then I bought a Tesla Model X, which is a pretty fun little thing I got the plaid one, so it's kind of fun thing to zoop around in a bit. I bought my wife some really nice things. I got her a bigger diamond ring and a Chanel purse that she's always wanted since she was a little girl. I got my daughter's college education paid off, put money into what's it called, a 429 plan or whatever it's called. And so that was pretty cool. But yeah, a lot of it was just put back into kind of the S&P 500 to stash away. Went on some nice trips. Oh yeah, maybe the more fun things that we did was I got to take my best friends out to Madrid, Spain. So we did like the four of us did a trip that I paid for everything and, sat first class and all that stuff. And then we also did a thing in Chicago where we rented out a limo and just stocked it with like good champagne and like went all around the city, bought food, drinks. We went to a Michelin restaurant with my friends and just kind of like my joy with money, honestly, is being able to do cool things for like my closest friends or my family. That's what brings me the most joy. My own toys, like they sometimes provide a little bit of a lift, but then I'm just like, it's just a car. But to be able to give like experiences to other people, that's pretty cool.
And I guess, yeah, like speaking of your family, you throughout this process, you got married, you had a kid. What was that like from their perspective and before and after the sale? I know you also mentioned you're now divorced. You're talking about like money stuff. Like talk to me about the family side of this.
Yeah, I think it was complex. I think that, obviously providing that type of security for my wife and my daughter was, very appreciated. I think that like my wife at the time wasn't like very materialistic. I mean, even the thing like the Chanel purse, it was kind of, I don't think she even hardly wears it around or anything like that. She's kind of a sweatpants and sweatshirt kind of girl. And so I don't think she really cared much about the materialism as much as she just cared about, making sure that we were safe in the case of medical emergencies, or making sure we had a good house over our head and all that stuff. I think for me personally, there was a bit of time when I struggled to when I got hit with all this money and I had just delayed so much gratification in my life. I think I felt entitled to some things that looking back on it, I don't think I should have felt very entitled to. I think that I, really expected, my wife to take on more of a kind of a more traditional role with like caretaking with our child. So I don't know if that was completely fair for her, but I felt like, hey, I'm bringing in all this money. You do your job and I'll do mine, kind of thing. But it was never really a job that she, ever, really wanted or signed up for in the first place. So I do have some, I wish I would have handled that a little bit differently. Yeah, so that was tough. Certainly going through the divorce and losing half is a whole nother thing to, have to stomach, and that was and continues to be, a little bit tough on my half. But yeah, when I think about the biggest thing that I learned from that event, it was just like, again, like realizing that money wasn't going to buy me a feeling of enoughness. It was crazy when I sold after a few months went by and then sort of the high wore off, I started feeling like, oh man, like I got to build a bigger company next time. Like, look at all these, I was in all these high net worth circles or ultra high net worth circles. And I'm like, oh, look at these guys. They got like hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. I was like, this is what I need to feel like I'm enough, like I'm not there yet, I got to keep going. And so, I think that there's some like pathology in that, right? Like, you get to the mountaintop and then you sort of like think that it's not high enough or something like that. And so, yeah, I think I was like really struck at some point, at like maybe a year into having this money, where I was like, oh, dude, you just keep chasing something. Like you're chasing ghosts, you're chasing that chip on your shoulder from when you were a kid. And like, what if you just like filled in that chip? And so that's where I started doing a lot of like self discovery. I started doing some psychedelic therapy that really started to make me realize that it wasn't the money that was going to bring me enoughness. In fact, it wasn't anything that the external world was going to give me, no matter how much I achieved. It was an internal job, and that was like, oof, that was a hard realization to come by, but probably the most important one I've had in my life.
Yeah, say more about that, because that is something, and especially on this podcast, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, business people, investors, and whether you say it out loud or not, that is the implicit game. It's like I want to keep growing the company, and it is, to your point, relative. You're comparing yourself to all these people, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, you're a billionaire? Like I thought I was doing great. And yeah, and it's the same for them. Like it's exactly to your point. This isn't the metric that anyone really finds a lot of satisfaction in. So yeah, talk more about your process and what you have discovered, but more importantly, the process, right? Like how do you go on about asking these questions, trying to figure out what it is that ultimately makes you happy?
Yeah. There's this like this theory about when you start to step up in different wealth and economic brackets, that you start to incorporate a lot of more friends and acquaintances that are also in that economic bracket, or maybe even a little bit above. And so there's always like, you don't really realize how many people are struggling below you, and how well you're doing, and but all you can see is the inadequacies, right? Or the lack of having X, Y, and Z. And so, I think as I started entering some of these, kind of ultra high net worth circles, I started seeing a lot of that. And yeah, it rang a familiar tune for me, which was that like, I wasn't enough. I wasn't quite there yet. Right. And by the way, when I say that, it's not like I had like awful self-esteem, that I was like, I had enough to hold myself, but there was still this like, yeah, just like that chip on the shoulder of being like, oh man, but like this guy has, $300 million in the bank, But a funny thing also happened to me is, as I started entering a lot of those circles, I started seeing a lot of like, I don't know, I guess it's like personalities that I also wasn't like quite vibing with. And I was like, I don't know that I want to have this life, even if it means 300, 400, $500 million. Like, I don't know if that I want to, kind of become what some of the people that I had met, were kind of showing me or displaying to me, lots of big egos. And
Say more about that. Like, what are some of the things that you did not want to I don't know, to emulate.
Yeah, like I'd get around a conversation with people and they'd be talking about, taking their private jet with Bezos, or they'd be, they'd just be talking a lot about money. And I've never been outside of just like really wanting to provide for my family. I've just never been a big money guy. I mean, I like to make money. I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't, because I think that money is, at least in some ways, kind of correlated with how much value that you can provide to the world. It doesn't always work that way, I don't think, and I like to provide value. So I like money, but I don't want to like focus on it. I don't want to be sitting around a table talking about it. It bores me. I want to get to know like what makes someone tick and what they're struggling with, what's going well, what do they enjoy doing. And just a lot of these kind of communities, it was all focused around like, oh, how do we protect our wealth, or how do we, I don't know, just all these things around money that I was just like not quite as fond of, and seeing some kind of ego in there as well. I don't really care a whole lot about like what car you're driving, or what private jet you have. Like, I just want to know if you're like a good human that I can trust and that I can like open up to, right? And so, yeah, I think like, getting connected to into some of those circles. And then, by the way, like part of this is also like reflecting my shadow side, right? Like some parts of myself that I needed to address around my own, obsession with money from before, when I sold the company. And so, yeah, being able to like do some psychedelic work and really start to get a sense of like what's actually important in this world, like number one thing, if you look at any research, is relationships, right? And so what good is having money if you can't have really solid relationships? Like my daughter, I started realizing like, oh, I'm missing out on some presence in her life. And so I really wanted to commit to that. I wanted to commit to, loving a partner really well, loving myself better, and surrounding myself with friends who just were really like loving, sweet people. That's kind of what I was really focused on for a long period of time there.
When you say friends, you also mentioned the research that shows that as you progress in your career, as you achieve more success, you're comparing yourself, you're hanging out with people in those circles. Do you find yourself hanging out with some of the people that you grew up with when you were poor?
Yeah, I never quite loved like the relationships that I made in sort of high school. There's a couple people that I stay in touch with, but there's sort of a balancing act for me, because like a lot of times with the high school friends that I had, there was like, I don't know, the friends that stay in your hometown and you see them bartending, and I wasn't really like, I'm not really trying to go into that life, simultaneously not trying to go into this like, private jet life either. So it's like I think my friends that I really bonded with had been my college friends, and then just friends that randomly have popped up over the years that have basically nothing to do with business. I mean, my best friends, when I think about it, they're not in the business space at all. Like my best friends are a psychologist. I got two friends in Minnesota. One's a stay-at-home mom and the other works for 3M. My best friend from college works for a company, JLL, doing some real estate stuff, but like none of them are like, high net worth entrepreneurial types. I'm not opposed to those friendships, but they just there needs to be some like heart to them. And that's what I look for in my relationships, is like, where's the heart and the soul? And sometimes entrepreneurs have a lot of heart and soul, but you got to sift through some of the ego.
Tell me more about the book that you're writing and what you've discovered through the process of writing it.
Yeah. So my book is titled Rich from Trauma, and it's a lot about what we've talked about in this podcast so far. It's a lot about like talking about my experiences growing up and some of the trauma that I face and what I learned from it. It's a lot about, not feeling enough, and then really having this ultra high drive, not only for wealth, but other measures of success too, right? Like education, athletic achievement, really wanting to just create this armor so that no one, I think what I feared the most was like that someone would think I was a loser, and I think I was afraid of that because I think there's a part of myself that felt like I was a loser, right? And so the book is really
And
about.
so, at what point did you think, yeah, about you being a loser? Was it something from childhood? Like, what were the things that made you think that?
Yeah, it's childhood stuff for sure. I think like a lot of my parents' insecurities, kind of were handed down to me, and I started to take those on, and I really felt like Yeah, for numerous reasons that I don't know, it wasn't working for me, and yeah, I guess I kind of felt like we were, kind of losers. It's tough to even say that out loud.
I'm curious, like how much, especially now that you have a daughter and she's growing up in a very different life circumstance than how you grew up. But going back to this concept of like, it's really interesting. You have this thinking you're a loser. Yeah, how much of it is like internal due to your own self-esteem? How much of it is external? Like, were there events where the outside world was like telling you that you now with your kid, hopefully gonna try to like insulate her from that, but at the same time, hey, you don't have like too much control over the outside world. So how does that like how do these images get created in us in childhood, and how much of it can we control, and how much of it is just like, yeah, like the world around us is gonna tell us things, and we have to figure out a way to deal with them.
Yeah. I mean, you know, my viewpoint on humanity is that there's a lot that we can control inside of us, right? Like, we can't necessarily control the external environment, but we can control how we perceive it, how we perceive ourselves, how much love and confidence we can provide ourselves with. And so I think the mistake that a lot of people make, which is this mistake that I made, which was, if I can if I can achieve all these things from the external world, these things will prove that I'm a good boy or a good girl or whatever. I'm enough and I'm doing all the right things, right? So you constantly, I mean, I think a lot of people are constantly out there seeking that from someone else, even if it's in like from a marriage standpoint or a partnership or money or achievement in other parts of their life. I think what I've realized is that it's strictly an internal game, and I think we have a lot of control over that internal game. I think we have more than we know. Our heads, I think, get in the way of our bodies, and I think our bodies usually hold the answers. I think of my body as kind of like, I don't know, some people would call it the soul, or kind of, this is my essence is in my body, and my head is a tool. But in our culture, we use our head as if it's like, you know, the biggest part of ourselves. Like, oh, this is my identity. This is who I am. Is my achievements. Is my wealth. Is whatever. But I found that like when I'm able to like really kind of tap into like who I am and be secure in that, the external things can change. They can go away. They can come. Like there's no real attachment to those. But I just get to feel really at peace within myself, and that's a wonderful place to be. And I've seen it with people that don't have a lot of wealth, right? Like they're so at peace. And so I feel like after seeing that, it was just like, oh wow, I got some work to do to get there.
That's beautiful. Like how okay, so going back to the book itself, like yeah, so say more about that. So it's essentially a memoir looking back at your life, discovering these things, some of these things that are still causing you pain to think about. Has it been, I don't know, cathartic? Like is the process of writing it, like saying these things out loud, is that helpful? Does it hurt? Like how's it
Yeah,
going?
it's a great question. Actually, it's very it's good timing to ask that question because I'm asking myself that question sometimes too. I think the part one of the book is a lot about my childhood, and yeah, it's a memoir, but it's part memoir, part like, hey, these are some lessons that I've learned, and perhaps I can pass those lessons down so other people can learn from those. But part two of the book, it kind of goes through the post sale and the divorce, and that's still a hard one for me to write on. Yeah, there's still a lot of emotions there, and so it's my motivation to write sometimes gets pretty hindered because I don't want to go and put myself in that space again. I think there were a lot of things that I felt really really hurt by in the divorce that I wish would have gone differently, but they didn't. And so I just get to continue to learn from various stages of suffering, and the divorce is probably one of the hardest pieces I've had to suffer through in my life. So I just, yeah, it's a good teacher, I could tell you that, and I just got to keep keep my ears open and yeah, keep writing when I feel up for it. Sometimes I do, and it can feel cathartic. Other times I avoid it like the plague. So my hope is that like part one's the childhood, part two is kind of the sale of the company, the divorce, and then part three is kind of the uprising, rising from the ashes, and kind of like realizing a new way of living that feels a little bit more clear and peaceful to me.
Do you think that I mean, just from your description of your childhood, it sounds like, yeah, there was some pretty bad things that happen and betrayals by the people that you love the most, and things that are really hard for anyone to go through, let alone a child. Versus now, your divorce it comes at a time when you're the wealthiest you've ever been. You've achieved all these things. You've done a lot of work on yourself. Your self-esteem's better. You're doing all this stuff. And yet it is more painful to write about than the childhood. Like, yeah, what do you think's driving some of that?
I think, well, first, I think the divorce was highly surprising to me. I always felt like I felt like we had a really nice life, a really amazing family. And, I thought things were going, I certainly think there were things that like needed to be addressed and improved, but I feel like overall I was like, this is good, let's go into like couples therapy. Let's address some of the things that need to change and let's get stronger and grow a more intimate bond. With my childhood, it was like, there was a lot of constant like things that would happen since I was really, really young where I started feeling, sometimes unsafe, with my family. And so it just kind of became a little bit more like I kind of expected it or kind of, I just never really felt great. Whereas my marriage felt, really wonderful for the time that we were there. And then it just sort of like something happened and it just sort of clicked and she really turned away from me. I couldn't do anything to save it. I tried doing, headstands to try to save the marriage and save the family. My nervous system was like ratcheted up beyond anything I've ever felt my nervous system before because I was so afraid of like losing the family. And so, yeah, I mean, when I look back on my life, I think the biggest trauma was definitely my divorce. It was at least a couple of years, if not 2 to 3 years of just having a constant daily, just like a punch in the gut feeling in my stomach where I was like, what do I need to do? What can I do? And I put a lot of responsibility on myself, which, looking back on it now, hindsight's 2020, but I think there was a lot that I couldn't control. I think she was going through her own thing in her own process. And so it's very hard for me. Like I am someone who I've always had a strong belief that I could control my outcome, any outcome in my life. Like I'm going to fucking work hard at it. I'm smart. I'm kind. I'm going to figure it out. And I could not believe that I just couldn't do anything to save this marriage, and that I put a beating on myself. I put a beating on myself for sure. But it's scary. Like life is scary. Like you think you have control until something fucking happens, then you're like, man, the universe thinks otherwise. Our money could be gone, our health could be gone. Our marriages. There's just so much that can be taken away, and so how do you continue to show up as a loving, trusting, best version of yourself person through some of these really, really difficult moments? That's what I try to do every day. Try.
Yeah, that really resonates, especially as an entrepreneur. I think like you talked a lot about control, and that is I totally relate to that. And for me, it's all like entrepreneurship has been a vehicle through which I want to control my life, my universe. For me, like the thing that the void in my soul I've been trying to fill is around community and tribe and finding my people. And you're building companies, you're doing these things, you can feel like I can do anything, I can figure anything out. And yes, it's a problem, but problems are just opportunities that you can turn into businesses, and it's going to be great. And then you have to be reminded that is you're not always in control,
Yeah,
and that's
things
hard.
change and people change. My ex changed a lot and was a very, very different person. And so yeah, I mean, loved her to death, but this just opens up, more opportunities. I'm dating someone who I'm in love with now, and it's been a beautiful, beautiful relationship. She's been wonderful to my daughter, and I've got new business ideas that I'm excited about pursuing. So like, for anyone that's out there that's really struggling, man, like you can get burned to the ashes, but you can rise. You just gotta fucking keep putting in the work, keep believing in yourself. I know it sounds corny, but like you just need to have as much self-love as you can and know that like you're here for a reason. The universe wants you to be here and they want you to learn from it. I don't know, man. It's hard. It's hard to go through it, but I think on the other end of it, if you can fully experience that pain and try to learn from it, I think there's some cool things that come out of it.
Yeah, and I love that you into the title of your book, "Rich from Trauma." It's about taking this pain and turning it into something that you can profit from and grow from. Say more about where you are now in your life and the things that excite you, the things that you want to work on. Like, what problems are you looking to I don't know. What problems are you looking to solve? What are the things that you think? Because you're an interesting entrepreneur where whether it was like intentional or not, right? There's an impact version to it, to what you're doing, whether it's for yourself or others. Is that how you're thinking about the next phase of your life?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think what I've recommitted myself to are like, what are your top priorities that you're most passionate about, right? And so if I look on like the personal side of me, for me, that's first of all, like I think just taking care of myself, like fitness and nutrition's has become a really big part of my life since selling my company. I was overweight. I wasn't eating well. I started doing my psychedelic journey work. I, for a while, became, vegetarian. I started lifting weights, and 3 years into this journey, I've maintained pretty much a 6 day a week workout routine. So that's like, I'm super passionate about that.
We can tell. That's great. Keep it up. Seriously, that's yeah.
No, I mean, I love it. Like I love, there's something about like putting myself through that stress and that pain and then sort of like, yeah, kind of feeling the relief afterwards that I really enjoy. So, there's that. My relationships, I love spending time with my daughter. She's such a joy. And spending time with my girlfriend. She's an extremely loving partner, and a very healthy, like just loves herself to death. So like having those two people in my life, and then, spending a lot of good time with friends. And then the other part of this are like my work passions, right? And so, it's wild. When I first sold the company, I was looking to create new opportunities. I was just so focused on economic opportunities. Like, where was the money? Where could I find, the most alpha, the biggest returns? Dude, I don't know. I just can't do that anymore. It just doesn't interest me. So like right now, the project that I'm most interested in is working in the loneliness space, going all the way back to my roots as a child. I really, when I told you before that, like I would gather all the kids in the community together to play football or whatever. I want to do that here in the United States and perhaps beyond. And I want to like really help with this loneliness pandemic because it's pretty brutal. And so I'm going to do what I can, do my part to help solve for that problem. It's a big problem to tackle. I'm not too sure if I'll do it or not, if I can have success, but that's what's really like driving me and driving my passion. Got the book. I've got a co-working and fitness company that I own with two other guys up in Minneapolis. And so that's starting to turn a profit, pretty healthy profit month to month. So we're looking at growing that and opening up a second location. I've got my house that I still co-own with my ex, but I'm actually putting it on Airbnb and trying to kind of create some extra revenue streams there for myself, just to kind of give me something to tinker around with a bit. But yeah, I mean, I think just like, really enjoying my relationships, then finally feeling like, okay, there's a project that I really want to work on. I really want to find a partner to do the project with. So if any listeners are out there that are excited about tackling loneliness and have a opposite skill set of mine,
Yeah, what is that skill set you're looking for?
I think similar to my previous business partner, like someone who's much better at kind of the executing the kind of nitty-gritty little kind of organized, detail-oriented person, that integrator to my visionary, is really what I'm looking for. But also someone who's like a good person and who won't sacrifice integrity for money. Yeah.
Keith was a veteran. Like I do some work with veterans. How do you feel about employing, partnering with veterans when it comes to some of these like skill sets that you're looking for in a partner?
Hell yeah. Yeah. I mean, really doesn't matter to me if they're a veteran or not. If they can show up, and I mean, the cool thing about veterans, I mean, I don't want to like stereotype, but I do think there's a strong work ethic, and I do think there's a strong integrity factor that I've seen with a lot of veterans. Whether that's I guess actually true or not, I don't know, but that's been my kind of experience. And so that aligns with me quite well. And yeah, I feel like I've gotten along pretty well with a handful of veterans. And so maybe that's the reason why, because I feel like I can trust them. I mean, if I can trust them to serve our country, I can sure as hell trust them to run a business with me, hopefully. Yeah.
Look, I think that there's definitely something very appealing about knowing that you can trust the people next to you to take a bullet for each other.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
we've lost that as a society. Yeah, just personally very fascinated by the organizations that can create that level of bonds between humans. And it's not just the military, but I think the military is a great example of it. And even reflecting back on your life story, multiple betrayals from people close to you, like very close to you,
Yeah.
and ultimately like trying to find that same about stability. Like that, I can go through tons of ups and downs, but just having someone that you know you can count on to not leave when either things get rough or when a better opportunity presents its way that's appealing and you don't want to do this anymore, but you kind of still have to show up. Otherwise, it's never going to work. So, yeah, I think
Dude,
it's
yeah, man, like whether it's a business partner, a strong friendship, or a romantic partner, like, yeah, I really do value that. Like, hey, like let's really love each other here. Let's stick with each other even through hard times. Let's communicate at hard times. Let's stick it out. Let's have some loyalty, right? Like ultimately, I just continue to take care for each other and show up. I want those people in my life. Those are my peeps. That's my community right there.
yeah, and it's like I've been thinking a lot about that. It's like how do you not just build the tribe, but then take care of the tribe and make it so that people want to stick around when it's really hard. It's really easy now to jump ship. Right? There's always something shiny. There's so many pressures from all sorts of people in your life. And at the same time, like you can also drive people away with all the things that like we fucked up on, right? And there's things I would have done differently in some of my relationships that cause people to leave. But it's yeah, it really is like an interesting like how do you actually and then you look at some of these organizations that have been doing this for thousands of years, like religions or the military or whatever, where they're getting people to stick around. Yes, it's not perfect and there's tons of conflict and issues, but they have much better success than most. And so it's a worthy journey and I'm excited to see where you take it.
Yeah, thanks. It's pretty hilarious that you use the word tribe because that's the name. My new company is called My Tribe, and it's all about kind of yeah getting back to a little bit of those tribal roots and trying to create really small community. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm curious how you think about this. It can be a whole nother episode just talking about this topic. Maybe we should. I'm really very passionate and interested in that concept, and that to me is the hole that I'm trying to fill is like finding my as like an immigrant. Having gone through what I went through, like the biggest thing is about belonging and finding a place where I can feel like I belong at the table next to my people, and there's ways to do it. Like I have some version. A big part of the reason why I started the company is to like create a place for people to come spend time together. And I'm curious like how you think about that, especially in the context of loneliness and in a very digital world where we're having this conversation from very far away versus like what historically has built tribes has been like, yes, you have like some bonds, sometimes even like biological bonds, but it's also just been about proximity. We like live in the same place and we have to depend on each other to survive. And right now, like we don't have to, or like I don't know the people in my apartment building. I legitimately like don't know most of the people who live there. Like, and then when you meet them, it's like you have some bullshit, shallow conversation in the elevator, and that's it. How do you solve that? How do you actually create my tribe in today's world?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, I love what you said about proximity. Took the words right out of my mouth. So my first passion is to get people not off of online communities, but just like I'm a big believer in in-person connection, right? Like you can video chat all you want, you can go on Facebook or Instagram all that you want, but there's something that's special about in-person community. So that's like objective number one for me. Objective number two is to find that community within your proximity. And what I generally mean by that is where you live, right? Where you spend most of your time. And then the third part of it is like, how do I find people who, share certain characteristics that we actually have a chance at a friendship here, right? Like people who share similar values, who might be going through a similar stage of life, maybe a certain age bracket or whatever that might be. And so, my mission in this company is to kind of create low barrier chances for connection. And what I mean by that is instead of throwing some massive event that, happens once a month at, apartment complex or whatever, is how do we create more of a dorm room feel where people can, kind of have an open door policy and just hang with people, right? Like how do we find low barrier ways just to hang and get to know each other? And kind of one extra layer to that is then like, how do we build, small groups of kind of like-minded individuals that can really like connect and start to build a deep trusting bond with one another. And so that's what I'm trying to create at my tribe, is to utilize, some of those things to create better community, deeper friendships.
And do you feel like those communities can be formed in your existing, let's say, apartment building, or is there something about, I feel like historically these intentional communities, when settlers get together in their wagons and head out west, like that act of finding like-minded people, they're willing to take that risk, and you're going through that journey together, and then you're settling a place. Versus like, oh, I just happened to find myself in a building and I'm now going to befriend these people. Like, is there a way to like create this frontier environment where you can get a bunch of like, why don't we just go buy an apartment building and move in with a couple of other friends and have an awesome experience?
That would be awesome. I would love to do that.
I'm not really joking. I think I've had this conversation with some people, like, how fun would it be if you actually like intentionally, like, while buying or moving into places, like, why don't you just do that with friends? I think we've gotten to a point now where we have like more money or more connections where it could actually be doable.
It's actually an interesting, I'm kind of thinking of a deviation to my business model of like, is there a way to use pre-existing housing structures to create like friend groups that actually move into apartment buildings, pre-existing friend groups? I mean, I'm approaching it from a little bit of a different direction. I'm approaching it from like, hey, where do you live? Can we create bonds and friendships right where you live? And I don't know if that thesis will be if it'll prove successful or not, but I also, I like the idea of like, maybe getting pre-existing friend groups into the same spot, and maybe you meet other pre-existing friend groups that are also at that spot to create new friendships as well, right? Like, we're so transient, so many people have to move for jobs or whatever else. And so like, how do you work with a transient population that might not have like all their high school or college buddies, in the same city? I certainly have none of mine here in Denver. So what do I do, right? Like, I don't know if you have it in New York, but like, what do we do when we don't?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think to put my Keith hat on, the question is like, do you need to do this at scale, or do you just do it once for yourself and your friends, see what that's like, and then figure out, okay, like how do we actually scale, if we even want to scale it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think that's right. Like, to do this at scale is a significantly different problem than to say, hey, I want to do this once. Like my view on this is that there's something about this intentionality, like being an immigrant, like finding the people, like you're self-selecting a group of people that are willing to take risks and change their lives and go somewhere. And there's also something about that process, saying, okay, like let's say you want to build a building or like small building and move in with a bunch of friends. There's going to be a process to go through. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. Like some people are not going to want to take on that risk. There's going to be costs. There's going to be there's going to be a bunch of shit. It's a lot harder to do than just saying, hey, we're already here. Like let's get together because we're neighbors. And so going through that shared hardship is important in a lot of other tribes, especially like military tribes, but other tribes as well. Like having gone through, like, especially if it's like a physical experience, which I don't know how you necessarily do in this setup. I've been going back to the old school ways that tribes have formed, and it's not just like, oh, like a theory. We'll write some code and make it happen. Like there were embodied experiences. There was real risk. There was like a self selection that happens, and people that want to this community to exist, and they go through and sacrifice things to make it happen. And then when you're there, it's like surprise, surprise, it works out because like yeah, like people have already like spent a lot, gone through a lot of hard stuff together, and are now in a place where they can enjoy what they've
Sure. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's funny. I just got done listening to this podcast. I think it's called like How I Built That or something like that. And they had the founder of Nextdoor, the Nextdoor app on there, and he was saying he's like, we had no idea that we were going to scale this. He's like, we just started off with this small thing in one community, and he said, don't ever. He's like, just if when you solve problems, don't worry about scalability right away. Like that can be a problem that you can solve for later on, but just like see if you can create something special, right? Something that works. And that's exactly what I want to do. That's my pilot program here at the current apartment that I'm living at. I want to pilot something and just see, can I create a sweet community at this apartment? Like, and I have a feeling I'll be able to scale it if I want to beyond that. But like, if I can do that, then we actually have something here, and that's going to be the test.
yeah, I love it. I love it. And I think it's, yeah, I don't know. I think it's, there's just so many things about this. Like the other side of it is that as I've gotten older, to your point about making friends and being thoughtful about people that you're becoming friends with, I've also realized that proximity is important, but you don't always end up next to the people that you want to be friends with. It's like like, is there a way to make it work? Like if Brett and Matei wanted to hang out and do this, I live in New York, you live in Colorado, how do we, is there like some version, unless like people want to move or people are in between places, to create these kinds of, I don't know, hubs, homes, whatever you want to call it, where you can go into and have that kind of community. But it's
Yeah, I mean,
hard,
I
yeah.
I don't I hope, I mean, what I hope is, in the apartment complex that I'm at, I don't know, kind of what's nearby you, but like, let's say there's, I don't know, 100 residents at this apartment complex. Like, there's gotta be 4 or 5 that I get along with pretty well. Like, the odds are in my favor that there's gotta be someone here that we can hang and like, and I found like my gym buddy, Harris is his name. Like I met him here at the apartment complex at an event, and I was like, oh, do you like to lift? Oh, sweet, we should like be gym buddies. And then all of a sudden we developed this friendship, and now we're doing double dates with him and his girlfriend or his wife. And so, I do think that there's opportunity to create new friendships and new bonds in the current spaces that we have already. But yeah, again, I'm gonna test that out and see if that actually works or not. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I hope it does work out because I think it's yeah, it's an issue and it's something that a lot of people would benefit from if we can figure out a way to solve it. I do think there's, to your point about there having been so much demand for therapy in universities, I feel like there is a lot of demand in this as well, and it's a
Yeah,
worthy thing to explore.
it's the number one pandemic of facing our country right now by far. It's awful. Loneliness is awful in this country. And
Yeah.
so we got to find something. Something's got to happen. I don't know. I'm gonna try to figure it out, but hopefully someone does. If it's not me.
No, but no, I think it's, yeah, I think it's, there's just some, yeah, there's something very worthy in the journey itself, whether it works or not, to try and to meet people and to make an impact, even if it's on a small scale. I think it's very admirable. Well, Brett, it was so great talking to you, man. I think you've been extremely generous with your story. It's not easy to dive that deep into your soul and then share these things. So I really, really appreciate your generosity. Yeah, it's been incredible to hear what you've came from, what you've built, and where you're trying to go from here.
Yeah, I love it, Mateo. Well, you asked some really good questions, so I'm always happy to jump on here with you anytime.
All right, man. Thanks.
All right, buddy.